Well, bonjour, everyone, this morning. Great to see everyone. For those of you, I'm Dan Dumbacher, the Executive Director of AIAA, or the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics, and it's always a thrill to be at the International Astronautical Congress and really appreciate the opportunity that IAF pulls together and the great Congress they pull together along with their host, CASC. So looking forward to a great plenary this morning. And our topic today is the value of low Earth orbit in the next decade. We have several speakers here. First, I'm going to introduce these all in alphabetical order. We have Lynn Ditmar, the Chief Government and External Relations Officer at Axiom Space. Unfortunately, Olivia Gomez Holtzhaus was going to be here today. Unfortunately, she had a family emergency she needed to address, so she will not be with us. We have Robin Gaytons, the Director of the International Space Station in the Human Exploration and Operations Mission Directorate at NASA headquarters. Iwao Igarashi, the Vice President and General Manager, Business Development, Space Systems Integrated Defense and Space Systems at Mitsubishi Heavy Industries. And Dr. Shauna Pandya, physician, aquanaut, scientist extraordinaire. We'll go there. And we don't have any formal presentations today. We're going to do several Slido questions to get the gauge of the audience. And also, just jump right into the discussion so that you hear directly from the experts. And get the conversation going. So to set the stage a little bit, recently the United States announced that the International Space Station is intended to operate out until 2030. In Europe, Europe is defining their roadmap for the future and planning to develop their own capabilities. India is developing a cargo option. China, Aerospace and Technology Corporation, and the Shenzhou 14 crew with the first module up of the Tiangong space station. And of course, the new commercial players engaging in human spaceflight and working for the commercial space stations in low Earth orbit. With the panelists today, we're going to talk about what the current atmosphere, current situation looks like, what the future looks like, helping the future happen. We would like to encourage everyone to use the Slido.com app for providing questions, and also that we can ask the panelists. And also, we're going to ask you to kind of give us some input on three questions via Slido, just to again get a sense. So the first one is up, and it's: are you actively working now on low Earth orbit activities, human and/or robotic? Just want to get a gauge of how many people are working in that arena, and we'll take the votes as we go. But while you guys are voting on that, or responding to that question, we'll jump right into the questions. We have an hour or just under an hour to have a really fruitful discussion, so please feel free to give us the questions, and we'll do the best to cover as much as possible. But first, I'm going to go to each of the panelists, and we'll start with Lynn and work our way back. And it really is, what are you seeing today happening in low Earth orbit, given the recent international capabilities, the new objectives that are coming out, observations, current trends, kind of your thoughts on what you see as the current environment, current situation.
Okay, Dan, thanks. And thanks always to the IAF and IAC for the invitation to be here. We have to start with the International Space Station, or at least I do. It's the sort of red thread that's run through my own career. I worked for Boeing during the last part of the design phase and oversaw procedural development for assembly, activation, and checkout flights for about half the flights. It's been extraordinary to watch the vehicle mature and to see the sort of stunning new capabilities that have developed over time, and the way that the onboard capabilities have been developed to allow really breakthrough science to proceed, as well as to teach us more about how humans live and work and thrive in space. So everything that's happening or that we project to happen in low Earth orbit really builds on that. And of course, that builds on a longer history. But it builds on that. And so I think what we're seeing, at least at Axiom, what we're seeing is a tremendous interest, which is global. It's been fascinating to us. We sort of began thinking about research and manufacturing, which is what we still see as a tremendous promise for low Earth orbit. But as time goes on, we're seeing more and more countries that are interested in developing their own capabilities and seeing low Earth orbit and commercial providers in low Earth orbit is a way to essentially bootstrap themselves into human spaceflight programs, to advance their own technical capabilities, to mentor some of their engineering and technology and science, not just firms, but relationships with institutions. And so I think we're really, and again, I have to go back to the ISS because I think it's created the framework and the platform that's allowing all of this to happen. So I think we're right at the cusp of seeing an opening up of new users, new countries, new objectives, new science, and it's just a fascinating and exciting time to be in this business.
Thank you, Mary Lynn. Robin?
Thanks, Dan, and good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming out bright and early for this panel. I think this is an exciting topic and really timely to be discussing the future of low Earth orbit. Thanks, Mary Lynn, for acknowledging the incredible successes of the ISS. The ISS is just busy as ever. We've got 7 crew now. We're about to launch our fall crew rotations. We've got cargo launches upcoming. So lots of activity on the space station today. And with that, the trend that we're seeing, we used to be sort of crew time limited. Now we've got the crew time, and we can't get the science there fast enough. So what we're really seeing now trending on ISS is a real increase in the output and the results. We're calling this the decade of results, and we're really seeing those results compounded out of the ISS today. So that's a terrific trend. Our ISS National Lab, which brings in our non-NASA users, is seeing a growth in their user demand as well. They only have to put in like 10% of the money, and everybody is bringing the rest of their cost. Of course, we provide the access and the crew time for those projects, but that's a really exciting trend to see. Over 60% of their users are from the commercial sector, and seeing a real growth there, and as evidenced also by the amount of money that those companies are able to bring in from the investor community after flight on ISS is over $1.5 billion and counting. So a real growth in commercial, which bodes well for the future for commercial space stations. So we're focusing right now on getting all we can out of this platform through 2030, but then planning for the transition to commercial LEO destinations later in the decade. So it's a really busy and exciting time in LEO for space station and beyond.
Great, thank you. Iwo, give us the little bit of thought process or perspective from the international industry.
All right, thank you very much, and I'm very pleasure to be here as a Japanese company. So first, let me introduce briefly the activities of MHI. From the very beginning of Japanese human space activity, MHI, Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, has been contributing many kinds of infrastructures. And MHI is, famous for a rocket manufacturer and a cargo ship provider. However, we have a long history of experimental equipment for life science in space. Current facility in Kibo of ISS, CBEFL, Cell Biology Experiment Facility Lift, is a very big 15 inches centrifugal gravity generator that everyone wants to use. And having participated in these ISS missions for many years, I really feel it's a fact that existence of human being in space is a key. What I'd like to say is that it's difficult to expand a large industry not only through robotic experimental activities, but also human activities, very important. I think many kinds of humans go to space and create various inspirations. So I'm very excited to join this session.
Thank you, Iwo. Shauna? I'm sorry.
Thank you so much. First of all, thank you for hosting me here on this esteemed panel. And if I were to sum up my excitement for the coming decade in low Earth orbit, I would summarize it as saying that we're at an inflection point when it comes to access and realizing potential for low Earth orbit. It means we are at the cusp for the first time transitioning from an era of government-run the International Space Station to transitioning to commercial space stations. We are doing this with collaboration. We are drawing in countries who previously haven't had access to low Earth orbit, both on the human exploration side, both on the commercial side, on the space station side, but also on the Earth observation, remote sensing, satellite side. And that access is so powerful for overcoming gaps in infrastructure when we look at problems on Earth, when we look at problems with communication, with climate change, with human migration. So that is so powerful. This really is the time in human history when we say, what if? What if we could bring more than just traditional space agency astronauts into space? What if we could bring commercial players into space? What if we could manufacture in space? What does that mean for pharmaceuticals? What does that mean for materials development, for semiconductors? What if we gave those who never had access to space before? And then what if we did things with gravity that we hadn't done before? So for example, one of my commercial applications is as medical advisor with Orbital Assembly Corporation. And we're saying, what if we created a partial gravity space station and set about answering those questions that we had about what partial gravity does to known human challenges in spaceflight, like bone density loss, like decompensation, like cardiovascular changes. So this is the most powerful time when it comes to asking those what-if questions and setting about answering those questions and bringing everyone on the journey with us.
Great. Thank you so much. And again, I would encourage everyone to use the Slido app. Questions are coming in. That's great. And also vote on the questions. And question number 2 that we have out there is, how informed do you feel about the economic and growth potential for low Earth orbit, to kind of follow along with what Shauna just pointed out for us? And I want to go back and maybe pull that thread a little bit further. Is what do you see as what are the key value offerings? What are the key opportunities that low Earth orbit provides for us from all the different perspectives here on the panel? For example, what kind of markets, business cases do you see? Why are the investments being made now? And maybe we'll just start with Shauna and go to Mary Lynn and come back.
Sure. Before I get into that question, I hope in answer to the second Slido question, that 57% of those who feel informed goes up to 90 or 95% by the end of this panel. So when we talk about the value proposition of low Earth orbit, I'll try to limit myself because it's such a long list. You know, there's the obvious value as a test bed, using low Earth orbit as a test bed for exploration class missions for the moon, Mars, and beyond. You know, practicing the hard stuff close to Earth, where we have maybe better and closer evacuation capabilities before we go, you know, 6 to 9 months away on Mars. Let's talk about the scientific return. My background is in science, medicine, neuroscience. Let's talk about the value of what we've seen from ISS research to date. We've seen, for example, the Rodent Research 19 experiment, which came back from ISS in September 2020, showing what neuromuscular adaptations in mutant mice could offer as potential for preventing bone density and muscle loss in mice and potentially for humans in long-duration spaceflight, but also using those advances in knowledge to help increase our understanding of neuromuscular and degenerative diseases like Duchenne's muscular dystrophy on Earth. That's so powerful. And, you know, that's just one example. Canadian research has contributed to our knowledge of aging in space, cardiovascular changes, arterial stiffening, pre-diabetic changes. So those changes have accelerated our understanding of accelerated aging in spaceflight. But it also brings us return to our knowledge of chronic disease on Earth. So that's one of the value propositions, and I'll leave it there because I know everyone else has a lot more to add. But I also just wanted to add, reiterate what I said in my first question, the value of non-human exploration when it comes to satellites, Earth observation, and then also bringing emerging nations into space on this journey and access to infrastructures they haven't had before.
Great. Thank you, Shauna. Mary Lynn, you're kind of on the front lines of helping make this happen. Your thoughts?
Well, I certainly agree with everything that Shauna said. You're a wonderful spokesperson. I would say that in addition to that, you know, there are things that most of us that have been paying attention to ISS all these years, you know, which is the low Earth orbit environment is a unique physical environment. People tend to focus on just the microgravity component of it, but there's other variables, obviously, that affect that environment. And so I think the idea of getting new people up there that are coming from emerging nations or other nations that are trying to get engaged. You know, one of the things that we've learned over and over again is the value of sort of intellectual and cultural diversity in coming to problem solving. You know, the example of the micrometeoroid shielding on the one on the ISS is a very famous one. Several different approaches to it that were generated by different nations, you know, sort of all coming together on this vehicle. And so one of the things I think that at Axiom we're fascinated by, and we spend a lot of time talking with people about research and manufacturing, is how to use it. And that's one of the challenges, of course, that NASA has taken on, the ISS National Lab has taken on, trying to sort of advance the idea that this is a really unique environment. How do we use it? How do we use it to create new polymers? How do we use it to create advanced lenses? How do we use it for all kinds of optics? I mean, there's a number of different ways that we can think about it. And so what's exciting to us is providing that infrastructure, which was just mentioned, and being able to build infrastructure now, all these years later from when the ISS was designed, with new materials, our own new manufacturing capabilities. Our own ability to sort of think about how do we put together vehicles in a somewhat different way. If we're going to build a next generation vehicle, which is what we're doing in Axiom, okay, then what have we learned about the ISS that we want to retain? What is it that we want to advance? Okay, and just putting people in that environment and then putting in front of them the sorts of problems that people want to bring into that LEO environment, we expect to generate just on-site innovation, as well as and so our challenge is, how do we provide the tools on orbit to allow people to innovate? So we talk about things like, for example, edge computing, right? We now have the capability to have computing on site right there, you know, that allows you the kind of computing power that ISS couldn't dream of. And it's just because of when it was developed, right? So what does that give us when you can do edge computing, when you can use the cloud? How can we sharing data real time? You know, how do we think about what kinds of innovations might be generated by that? So that whole notion of infrastructure and what can we do with that infrastructure and how do we push that boundary, that's what's really exciting to us.
Great, fantastic. Ewell, your perspective from the industry side.
all right, from the industry side. So it is easy to understand to go to the space and have interesting experience in the low gravity and have a chance to something business. But I feel at this moment, even in Japan, there has been a recent surge in demand to go to space. For example, there are many Japanese civilians who have experienced the desire to travel in space. According to the Space Ties database, currently lists 30 civilians. And there are more than 4,000 Japanese people applications for the recent JAXA astronaut recruitment. And I feel that from the commercial side, industry sides, at this moment the demand is from the, it is very difficult to express, but it's like a passion and it's a promotion. And the company reputation. These are very effective aspects for newcomers to the space. I feel so. So for that, to join the space business, and for that, human in space, very important. It's my,
Yep.
thank you.
Thank you. Robin, how does all this play into your thinking and thought process for Space Station?
Yeah, so from our perspective, we're trying to achieve our goals in all of these areas. So building on the inspiration aspect, even though we're about to launch this great big moon rocket, and that's going to be hugely inspiring, the space station in low Earth orbit provides an opportunity every day for us to interact with students and the general public and to get space messages out. The low Earth orbit and the space station provide really the perfect test bed for technology development to practice and develop the capabilities that we are going to need to go beyond low Earth orbit, and especially long duration missions to Mars. And we're going to continue to need access to a test bed like that, a continuously crewed platform in low Earth orbit to continue to test technologies, do the human research, as we venture out beyond low Earth orbit. And then we're working with our other government agencies and commercial partners on all these exciting applications, medical advances, regenerative medicine, advanced materials, the understanding our climate, all of our Earth observation instruments that we have on Space Station today. So incredible return on investment for benefits right here on Earth. And then finally, our international partnerships. We're taking our partnerships beyond low Earth orbit as well, but we'll be looking for opportunities to continue to collaborate with our partners in low Earth orbit. And it's really exciting to see the countries that continue to come to the space station. We're up to 109 countries and areas that have done some sort of activity on the International Space Station, and we're about to add 2 more. Zimbabwe and Uganda are going to be flying CubeSats on an upcoming mission. So we're very excited, and we just keep coloring in the map, and that's a really exciting trend as well.
Excellent. Thank you. I'm going to ask you guys to maybe stand back and think, 5, 10, actually 15 years down the road. What do you see the future looks like in terms of who could some of the emerging actors be? What is that emerging value that if you, recognizing the crystal ball is rather cloudy, how do you guys see from your perspectives the different possibilities 10, 15 years down the road? Robin, I'm going to kind of start with you and then we'll work from there.
Well, we're working really hard to, as we say, be one of many customers. So we're working really hard through the International Space Station to incubate and to bring in these other users through the ISS National Lab and our partnerships so that we enable that future. So we're working with other government agencies, for example, National Institutes of Health, National Science Foundation. What I'm hoping for is that they see the return on their investment. You know, they're sticking their toe in the water right now on space station, but that they really see those returns so that that becomes ingrained in their missions going forward. You know, and they're able to support the commercial space stations as a whole of government approach. We're also hoping that these markets take off that we're incubating now through particularly focusing on in-space manufacturing and those applications. And we're hoping that we sort of can graduate, right, those from needing government subsidies so that they're self-sustaining markets going forward.
Great, thank you. Mary Lynn?
So to go back to something I said before, one of the things that's been most interesting for Axiom over the last year is the global aspect of interest in a next generation commercial platform. So we've signed MOUs with several nations. We signed one just recently with New Zealand, which is focused on advancing their research and science in very specific areas. We've signed one with Hungary. They have interest, actually it was mentioned yesterday in another session. We're actually helping them to sort of reestablish their human spaceflight program. They flew a Hungarian astronaut as a cosmonaut many years ago, and they're interested in reestablishing that human spaceflight program, and so we're engaging with them in that, as well as to help build up some of their research, science, and engineering. We have a mentor relationship with one of their engineering companies there. We've signed another one with Italy, which is a very broad MOU. We're actually working with them right now to sort of develop a working group, which is taking me back to my early days on the space station, to develop a working group where we're identifying other industries that may want to basically come and play, think about how it is that they may use a next generation commercial platform. And then there's a couple of more that are going to be announced this week, which I would love to tell you, but just stay tuned. They'll be announced here at the IAC. And then we're in conversations with others. And what's interesting about this, there's several things that are interesting about it. First, the specific work that those nations are interested in, which is very broad in terms of the research, the science, technology, engineering applications. But the other thing that's interesting about it is the establishment of these business to government relationships. So historically, these relationships have been government to government. And of course, plenty of businesses have business to government relationships. I'm not trying to suggest that. That's been going on for a long, long time. But with regard to establishing these sort of capabilities in low Earth orbit, some of the discussions are fascinating because when you're not doing business with a business, or when you're not doing business with a government, and in fact, you have to kind of talk about this in a different way, what do those business models look like? The space station, in part, operates on a barter system, a very complex economy that's developed over time. What does that mean when you put that in a commercial environment? So we're learning as we go, right? And so what's very interesting and challenging about that for us also is the emergence of these new business models, which is also fascinating. So it's a great time. It's a great time to be in this business.
Great, fantastic. Ewald, your thoughts on what's 15 years down the road?
So I'd like to introduce our effort of HTVX. It's not a human, but robotics mission is important too. It's a combination. The interesting function is the free flyer role. After providing the cargoes to the ISS, that HTVX is free apart from the space station. So it's a very flexible place to have some experiments and activities and there. And if possible, the in-space manufacturing would be realized in there. So I think it's a possibilities there.
Okay, great. Shauna?
Thanks for the question. So if we fast forward to the year 2037 and we look up at the night sky and, try to get a bird's eye view, but from the ground of what's going on in LEO, I think we would have to allude to what's going on in commercial, in manufacturing, in orbital debris management, as well as in access and militarization of space. So when we talk about commercialization, I think Robin and Mary Lynn covered it perfectly, talking about access, I think the up-and-coming young professionals in the audience here today, they're going to be our second-generation astronauts who have regular jobs that take them up to low Earth orbit, whether it's for maintenance, whether it's for science, whether it's for operations, and that's exciting. That's never been done in human history before. Speaking to the new platforms we're developing, we've talked about commercial space stations. We've talked about evolving the capabilities for ISS. We've talked about partial gravity. So imagine having test beds for practicing Artemis operations and EVA operations in 1/6 gravity and interactions with lunar regolith in low Earth orbit before we ever went to the moon. Those are the capabilities we're developing. We also have to be mindful of the fact that we all know that orbital debris management is an ongoing issue, and my hope is, being an optimist, that we will have organized ourselves and managed it within 15 years. And we also need to be mindful of the ongoing militarization of space. So it's not very well known, but Canada has now joined the ranks of the USA, the UK, Australia in establishing its own space force. So Canada, as of August of this year, Canada has established its own 3rd Canadian Space Division to maintain security and its assets with its allies. And then finally, manufacturing. This is an emerging field. We know that there's potential for pharmaceuticals. Crystals grow bigger in microgravity. Spheres are more spherical in microgravity. So what does that mean for what we can develop? One of my high school students payloads that I supervise, they came up with this ingenious payload to develop foam in microgravity, and students did that. So, this really is an exciting time to project and also be part of the next 15 years for LEO.
Great, thank you. I'm going to ask, first of all, a question, one of my last ones, but I'm also going to weave in some questions from the audience so that we got a little bit of a mix here. You guys have laid out some vision for the future, and the question becomes then, what do we need to do as an industry writ large to help make sure that comes to pass or to facilitate that occurrence? And part of that, and this is where the audience part comes in, is how confident, what do you guys think the probability is of having a commercial space station operable by 2030?
Extremely confident.
I was betting on that answer. Thank you for that, Mary Lynn. We appreciate it. The question now is, what do we need to do as an industry? Obviously, help get the commercial space stations in place and make that forward. What else do we need to do as an industry to help facilitate all of this to occur?
Sure. So in medicine, when we're managing acute and critically ill patients, we look at the most likely case scenarios as well as the best and worst case scenarios. And I think, looking at operations as critical as operations in low Earth orbit, we need to take the same philosophical approach. So we need to say, well, what's the most likely case scenario? We've seen the emergence of commercial platforms, commercial space stations. There's at least 4 that we know of between Axiom, Orbital Assembly, NanoRacks, and Blue Origin. So at least a handful of them are going to succeed, hopefully all of them. So if that's the most likely case scenario, then how do we manage who has access? How do we ensure equitable access for emerging space nations? What is the worst case scenario when it comes to the growing compendium of orbital debris that we have to worry about? What is the best case scenario if we were to give everyone who wants access to low Earth orbit, both in terms of being there in person and also getting the capabilities for what it means for developing telecommunications infrastructure, Earth observation, and remote sensing capabilities?
So our plan is built around having commercial LEO destinations available by 2028 so that we have a 2-year overlap to be able to transition activities from the International Space Station to these commercial space stations and not have a gap. That's our critical, we don't want a gap in capabilities in low Earth orbit. So how can industry help get the space stations ready? I'm also working very hard we need to be thoughtful about this transition. We know that we've built up capabilities on the ISS over the years, and it's a very capable platform now. We have over 20 commercial facilities operating. We have all kinds of laboratory capabilities. We know that when the commercial LEO destinations first start, they're probably not going to start there. They're going to start with a lower level of capability and build up as well. So how do we ensure user continuity as we go through this transition? So we're trying to identify and complete the most critical activities that need to be completed on the space station before the transition, but then figure out how can we transition these facilities and equipment from space station over to commercial LEO destinations in a way that's flexible. So someone builds something for space station, it will also work, it's sort of platform agnostic, it will also work on a CLD so that it doesn't have to be rebuilt, redesigned. Those are the things that we're thinking about now, as well as planning for our international partner transition, our own NASA transition, and then our national lab transition, all of these various user groups. How do we ensure that continuity as we go through the transition so we don't have a gap for any of these groups?
Thank you. Will?
Okay, so in my perspective, so the important things for the commercial usage, to gather the potential customer is give them the menu, very easy understanding menu. So they are looking for using when we can use the space and the cost price and what we can get from the space activities and so on. So especially from the Japanese potential customers, it is invisible at this moment. So I guess at first we can show the menu list, how to use the space station, and what is the restrictions, and what the government can assist, support the safety aspects, and so on. These are very important to jump into the space business.
I think we're going to have to be really hard-headed about business cases. And I don't think we're there at all. So whether or not the approach right now that NASA is taking is there's 4 competitors, it's unclear, okay, that the market is supportive of 4 competitors or 2 competitors or 3 competitors. We don't know, really. And I think we're going to have to be really judicious about the decisions that get made. When do you down select? When do you merge interests? I'll tell you, everybody in the industry, on the industry side, is talking about this and thinking about it. We wave our hands at the question of demand. Everybody says, oh, demand is the challenge. Yeah, really? Okay, demand is the challenge. So we're in the process of developing some of that demand. We're building on the demand that's been built from the space station. But there are going to be some hard choices that need to be made, and they're going to need to be made sooner than most people are prepared to make them. That's the first thing. Second thing is, I think there needs to be a recognition of the fact that the kinds of business cases that are going to be needed in low Earth orbit, they're not, we talk a lot about in-space economy. It's not an in-space economy. It's a terrestrial economy that uses space. And therefore, those things that tend to generate a lot of revenue here and seem as though they may have application to space are going to be the ones that people are going to be looking at, because they're going to be thinking about, can we transfer those? Is there things that space offers to those sectors? Okay, and I think that we need to be thinking very clearly about the kinds of revenues that are going to need to be generated in order to be able to support one or more space stations. And I don't think we're talking about that yet. So as we look forward, okay, I think that those are the kinds of considerations that we're really going to have to come to terms with, and sooner rather than later.
So, Mary Lynn, thank you for answering some of the audience questions before we ever got to them. That's great. Ahead of the ball game. Shauna?
Yeah, and I think building off Marilyn's excellent insight there is, these are 4 American commercial space stations, and we're talking about bringing the entire planet to low Earth orbit. It's not hard to imagine that before long that we're going to have other players develop their own versions of commercial space stations. So it's really critical that if we're talking about only 4 commercial space stations from one nation, we should answer that question about demand sooner rather than later.
So we have several audience questions on debris and how that impacts. I think we've already recognized that that's a risk and a challenge that needs to be addressed. I'm going to defer the space traffic management, space debris discussions to the experts in other places. But we do have a couple of other questions. One, and Mary Lynn, I'm going to go to you because they actually ask you specifically, is where do you see, where is the biggest, most profitable near-term in-space manufacturing opportunities?
So it's probably, yeah, now we get into crystal balls again, right? I think we've known for a while that biomedical applications, that's a really broad term, but I'm throwing out a big net intentionally. Biomedical applications, I think, have potential to generate terrific amount of revenue if they are scalable. And scalability is sort of another huge challenge here, right? When we look at things from a business point of view. And it's the same thing for manufacturing. You know, it's one thing to talk about doing manufacturing inside a glove box. It's another thing to be talking about doing manufacturing at a large scale, either external to a station or in a research and manufacturing module, such as the one that we're talking about developing for Axiom or are developing for Axiom. And so the question is, are these things really scalable? And there's a lot of work that's been done on that, you know, with people sort of trying to look at it, but that's a challenge. So rather than, I mean, and then the other ones we know about, I mean, we sort of know, optics, right? And another one is, you know, it's basically in-space assembly. You know, I'll do the ISA part of the, because we already mentioned the manufacturing piece. But again, that's, you think about that for the future, there's some obvious applications now for satellites and, you know, possibly servicing satellites and developing robotics that can kind of move around out there. You know, we can see all that. But in terms of, if you ask me what the most lucrative one is, I can't tell you right now. I think we're still in the process of identifying several areas that look like they have a great deal of promise and then exploring those applications, with scalability being one of the biggest challenges.
Excellent. Thank you. I want to switch gears a little bit. We have an excellent question here that ties into some other topics, and that is, we talk about bringing in the diversity, the different people, the different talents, the emerging nations. And I want to expand this question a little bit. It talks about how are we reaching those outside the industry to engage with space, and that I want to frame that up in the context of workforce development, because this is actually a topic that's important across the industry. But how do we bring that diversity in? How do you, from your respective roles, see and are able to bring in those communities that typically are not involved? And how do we get more people involved in this effort? And Shauna, maybe I'll start with you.
So I'll start by giving credit where credit is due in that it's not the big players simply reaching out to say, hey, you look like you could use a leg up in space. There is definite interest across the planet in space and developing STEM careers and developing that workforce capacity. And so, when I was going through my education, it was the big five, the ISS partners. It was Canada, ESA, Russia, JAXA, and of course, NASA. And then, as I went through my career, there was the development and the establishment of the Mexican Space Agency, the Portuguese Space Agency, the Brazilian Space Agency, and then simply in conversations here at IAC this year, I've seen and heard and had conversations around the Bahraini Space Agency, the Eritrean Space Agency. Like, that's incredible, and it's inspiring, and it's not us pulling up these other countries, it's them saying, we recognize the power of having spacefaring capabilities. We want to invest in that. There's driven players in emerging nations. So it's on the side of the established players, for example, speaking from the Canadian perspective, it's being open to recognizing that each nation will have its own strengths. We heard from Lisa Campbell on the CSA perspective yesterday. In Canada, it's science, it's medical operations, it's exploration, and saying, okay, well, this is our niche. What is your niche? How do we collaborate together? So it's giving credit to emerging space nations that they will have their own strengths and capabilities, and then collaborating together, and then building that capacity in situ in those countries through STEM education at a very early age. I've heard of that happening in Qatar, in Bahrain, in Saudi, and helping them build that capacity, but also making sure that that in-house talent stays within the country to help build those native capabilities.
Great, thank you. Ewald, thoughts on?
It's for me, it's very difficult questions. I only say if the demand increase, the sales will increase, and a small start would be easier. For example, the in-space manufacturing, the medicine. As one of the example, and I would like to contribute in that area.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to expand where we get these skilled workers from to increase diversity, and I did a talk, as you know, to your alma mater, to Purdue, and spoke to some students last week about potential careers in space. And I think, beyond the traditional aerospace engineering, other engineering disciplines, we're expanding. It's really cross-disciplinary opportunities in space careers. I was talking to one student about, we have lawyers, we have communications people, and her eyes just sort of lit up, these, I may not have to, be a traditional engineer in order to have a space career. So I think we need to expand the paradigm of where we're looking, increase the diversity, as well as just get the word out that there are opportunities other than these traditional fields for our students. I also worry about trying to grow the next generation of microgravity researchers. I think some dedicated programs and efforts in collaboration with our universities would be really helpful there we have the engineers, but those smart people who know how to adapt terrestrial research to space, I think is an area we should probably focus more of our curriculum on.
Great, thank you. I greatly appreciate you pushing on the idea that it's more than just the engineers. It's all of the talent that's needed to go make this happen.
So I think we've been kind of banging our heads into this for a while. In how do we increase I'll just call it the technical STEM workforce, and increase that. And in the United States, we've suffered from sort of a loss of government investment, so I'm sharing my bias here, over the last 25, 30, 40 years in research and development. And that has then kind of fed down into the pipeline, I think, in some negative ways. And now what we're doing is actually starting to see a recognition that we need to actually have that pipeline. It's got to be created prior to high school, through high school, into trade schools, into community colleges, into college, et cetera, sort of establish that entire path the whole step of the way. I think we are seeing that, but also more broadly, to kind of pull on what Shauna was saying, I think we do need to be thinking about how do we do more cross-cultural, international mentorship programs. And that requires governments and businesses coming together and making a commitment that they're going to do that. Various nations handle that largely through their immigration policies once you have students who are pretty far along in their academic development or their technical development. But I think there's a way to reimagine that and think about that, again, beginning earlier. It would be very interesting to sort of see international collaborations and sort of shared programs in high school that are really focused on space, using space sort of as an organizing principle. And you can do that across governments. There's already programs like this. I'm not trying to say they don't exist. They do. But I think we really need to focus on the fact that it's important to nations. It's important for the health of the planet. It's important for our own futures. We used to talk about it a lot in terms of global competitiveness among nations, and that's certainly true. But there are some larger scale issues now that I think really need to push this forward.
Thank you.
And just to add to that, you asked a great question, Mary Lynn, saying where do we get these STEM personnel from? And one thing I think we need to acknowledge is that there's certain women and minorities that are certainly underrepresented in STEM. I was once asked, prove to me that women are underrepresented in STEM amongst space agencies, and through a quick search of the data worldwide, women form 7 to 37% of the STEM workforce, depending on which space agency you look at. So we still have some work to do. And one of my friends, Kelly Girardi, who is a space professional in herself, once phrased it so beautifully. It was never about aptitude; it was about access. So there are those space professionals out there, and they may just not have been given the platform or the catalyst that they needed to know that they could become these burgeoning space professionals. So having dedicated programs to look at women, underrepresented groups, LGBTQ, and telling them, yeah, you absolutely have a place as a future space professional. You have a lot to contribute. I think that's going to be so key to developing the picture of diversity and inclusion that we want in low Earth orbit.
Great. So we have a few minutes left. What do each of you maybe see as some of the key technology developments that are necessary to help facilitate all this? And then while we're working through that one, we'll take the last 5 minutes or so and let everyone have a minute to talk about what your vision is and the value, just to put a good closing on the visions and the value. But first, what do you see as some of the key technologies that we need to address? And Iwo, I might start with you if you have some thoughts on that.
The key technologies. So for established organization or companies like us, it has the responsibility to show the international rules that are valid and fair and transparent and well measured. It's important. And I repeating my thinking. The development of the space business requires an increase in demand. To that end, I believe that the most important thing is to build a place. This is more accessible and easier to use and evolve and with the needs. It's my understanding. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Robin?
Yeah, some of the key technologies to answer that question, I think technologies that bring the Earth laboratories to low Earth orbit platforms are key, and also technologies that allow repetitive science. Right now we do a lot of, we fly something, we learn it, we bring it back down, and then we have to refly. But to be able to repeat the experiment on orbit, maybe change the parameters, and because the access part of space is expensive, and it's going to continue to be expensive. So if we can enable more to be done once the experiment is on orbit, as well as key technologies and bringing that cost of access down, I think are critical. And then I have to put a plug in for my longtime discipline, life support systems. That's always a hard one. NASA's been investing a lot in crew support and life support systems to get us ready to go beyond low Earth orbit to Mars, and we're anxious and willing to share with the commercial partners those technologies, which I think are going to be critical to support the commercial LEO destinations. And then finally, the vision question, just to put a point on it, we're trying to do something really hard. We're trying to plan for this future where we transition from government-owned and operated platform to commercially owned and operated platforms without leaving anyone behind and without having a gap. And that's a really hard thing. So we're all going to have to work together on that. But that's my vision. If we can make it through the transition and provide that continuity, I think we'll be successful.
Great. Mary Lynn?
It's never been done before. So I was making a mental bet with myself as whether or not you were going to go to EGLIS. I would have been disappointed if you hadn't. But sort of following on that, though, technologies, rather than a specific technologies that allow reuse, recycle, et cetera. Because these are closed systems we're putting up there. Well, they're semi-closed systems, right? I mean, it's a constrained habitat with a very defined physical environment. So being able to get as close to closed, which I know has been the holy grail for Robin and others on the EGLIS system, yes, but also everything we're taking up there. Think about how it is that we can reuse that. How can we take materials that we're taking up there and advance, for example, 3D printing, so that we can make use of materials that we're not even thinking about using right now for 3D printing. On the Axiom station, we're using an iteration of the Sabatier that's on the ISS to basically capture CO2 from exhalations from the crew members, basically convert to methane, and then use it in our propulsion system. So we're trying to get our propulsion systems essentially to be closed systems, because those modules can sort of separate and go off and fly their own little missions and come back. That concept of, again, using something that's there, in this case CO2, okay, and being able to then put it to a different use. So we're really interested in technologies that allow us to do that. And then those technologies that we develop in space, those kinds of advancing recycle, reuse technologies, obviously have tremendous implications for here. And so those kinds of things would be of great interest, and I think have tremendous impact.
Great, thank you. Shauna?
Yeah, my answer is twofold when it comes to two key technologies for enabling access to low Earth orbit. I think the first one will be not a surprise to anyone, and that's artificial partial gravity. Because if we're talking about enabling anyone to have access to space, anyone who doesn't have the incredible health and has not been selected out against medical issues like a government space agency astronaut, we really need to make low Earth orbit habitable for those who might be staying there for 30 days or beyond. We still haven't solved the space flight-associated neuroocular syndrome. And so artificial gravity, partial gravity, potentially offers us an answer to that. Also having rapid, cheap, reusable, low-cost access to space is going to be key for being able to go up and go down and go up and go down again. So I think those are two key technologies that we really need to realize to be able to realize the vision of low Earth orbit that we want.
Great, great. So going to go to the vision thing real quick. Have less time than I thought I was going to. Robin already gave us hers. That transition that we've never done before is key. Mary Lynn?
Well, in 15 or 20 years, I want to see us basically just busting the seams in uses of infrastructure that's in low Earth orbit, with people imagining new ways to use that infrastructure and actually making demands on the infrastructure, making demands in such a way that force the infrastructure to evolve. And ISS has already done that in lots of ways, but I want to see that with the next generation stuff and then the next generation stuff. I'd like to see us, we're talking about next generation stations now, I'd like to see us like moving into our third and trying to think about how it is that we are going to get there within 15 years.
Great. Iwo?
I want to imagine the world coming, the space business and the Earth business collaborating each other, and win-win, and a lot of potentially expand.
Great. Thank you. Shauna?
In the last 6 seconds here. I want to end with an anecdote of where I am today, and hopefully that will help inspire those with a view to who want to participate in commercial low Earth orbit activities. So when I started, like many of us, wanted to be an astronaut when I was a kid, and then that gradually focused on being in space medicine, and then I wanted to do research, and then I realized, hey, I'm not doing anything in commercial space, and I started to work on that. And as of today, I have 7 commercial biomedical payloads flying on various commercial partners. That's something I never imagined I could do before. And so what I encourage those who want to contribute to this vision 15 years from now is, what do you want to do in commercial? Do you want to develop payloads? Do you want to develop manufacturing capabilities? Do you want to leverage the computing capabilities through spaceborne computing on the International Space Station? What do you want to do? Because now is your time. You find that access and you create that vision of what you want commercial low Earth orbit capabilities to look like 15 years from now. So grab that opportunity and be part of that future. Create that vision of the future you want.
Fantastic. Thank you for all of that. One thing I do want to say, I want to acknowledge some behind-the-scenes help. These things don't come together by themselves. Kevin Foley, Michelle Gates, Peter Battenberg, I want to publicly thank you for all of your help and support in making this come to fruition. So thank you. And then all of us, please let's thank our panelists for sharing their time and their expertise with us. And we wish everyone a great rest of the day and a great rest of the Congress, and look forward to meeting everyone and talking with you guys through the rest of the week. So have a great rest of the week, and thank you.